Ning Hui See is a pianist from Singapore and a PhD researcher at the Royal College of Music in London. Ning Hui's research examines gender, value, and the canon, with an aim towards the practical and meaningful integration of lesser-known composers into concert programming. She's currently exploring these issues through a concert programming for Clara Schumann's Piano Sonata in G minor. Ning Hui has been described as, quote, an ideal advocate, unquote, for this work. The quote is from Aaron Shore, UK pianist and professor. She gave the sonata its Singapore premiere in 2018 and has been on a long and exciting journey ever since.
Clara Schumann's sonata was written over the Christmas and New Year of 1841-42, but it was only published in 1991. So we could say that it's living its second life in the 21st century. To me, the sonata represents a transition in so many ways. Clara Schumann was 22, and she had successfully progressed from child prodigy to mature artist. She had just married Robert Schumann in 1840 and left the obsessive control of her father. Her compositional style was moving away from early romantic virtuosity and towards the German Lied, the Bach revival, and classical forms. I have a very special and deeply personal relationship with the work because I first played it in 2018 as a master's student, searching for my musical identity and seeking to become someone who is less reliant on performance traditions. So, through her sonata, I have been going through a transition of my own. For my PhD, I've placed Clara Schumann's sonata in 4 different concert programs. I'm looking into how the internal processes of performers can be externalized through their concert programs and performances. As we transform the Western classical music canon, it's important to think about meaning-making, strategy, and longevity. So it's not just about playing more music by lesser-known composers or women composers, but looking inwards and outwards to reflect on what it reveals about us and how we can do this work better or differently. My most recent concert placed Clara Schumann's sonata in an all-women composers program with Fanny Hensel, Florence Price, Amy Beach, Kaya Sarajevo, and Emily Coe. And I tied it all up with a theme of song, poetry, and romance. I tried interleaving for the first time, splitting the 4 movements and weaving them with other works to create mosaics. And this was inspired by the scholarship of Valerie Gertzen and Alexander Stefaniak. And it has been such a transformative experience for me, as a performer, to explore how much creative agency I can have with musical works.
So my first question is, what drives you when you play, and how do you engage with your scholarship as a performer?
Mm-hmm. So I think the main motivation for me to do artistic research is really about getting to know myself better as an artist and as a person, not separate from each other, but as a person who is also an artist, and the constant aim of doing better and doing things differently in a reflective way. So a great part of my concert programming research drives into some of the deeply entrenched mindsets that I've learned over the years from my conservatoire training, from the way I've been taught, from the books that I've read, which follow traditional musicology. And so I came into my research with this very set idea of what good music or what good art is. And what I've been trying to change through my artistic research is to expand the range of art that I appreciate and to bring that into how I am as a performing musician, because I truly believe that how we are internally, it comes through in the music. If you really love a piece of music and you really value it, regardless of whether it's in sonata form or it's 5-minute work or it's a much more complex work, whatever complex means, if you value that piece of music, it will come across in the way you interpret it, in the way you speak about it in the way you perform it. Over the last 3 years, a lot of it has been just changing some of the constructed hierarchies that I have around musical genres, musical form, stylistic traditions. I realized earlier this year that I had a hierarchy of program types, that there were certain types of programs that I saw as more intellectual or more just superior in a way. And I was trying to deconstruct why that is, like, why do I have that sort of hierarchy in my mind? And how can I try to reshape it, change it into something else? A lot of this is really helpful towards how I am as an advocate for women composers, because at the end of the day, that is my goal. But it's also questioning how I am as a person and the values that I have and how that plays into my approach towards these composers. And I came to realize that in the past, and even in the very recent past, that I was approaching many of these lesser known composers with a mindset that was rooted in the canon. So I was trying to break out of the canon as a performer. I was trying to play works which were on the margins of the canon or outside the canon, but I was approaching it with canonical principles. And I think that's a realization that I would not have made if I had played only the music without questioning the process of putting it together, or if I had done the research and wrote tons and tons of historical narratives, but without actually embodying the music in performance. That's been the most big discovery this year, which I don't think I would have come to if I hadn't been doing it as artistic research.
What does it mean to be a performer in your own body and in your own experience and in your own world?
Mm-hmm. So for me, through artistic research, I have become much more in tune with the tactile relationship that I have with my music and my instrument, which is the piano. And a lot of this could be down to possibly the way I was taught, but also how I am as a person with my personality. I naturally process ideas quite intellectually in a very definitive way. And that includes music, which means that sometimes I'm not as in tune with my senses as I could be. And that's something that I really only realized a few years ago, which was great timing because that was just slightly before I started my PhD. So a lot of the goals that I have for myself as a person out in the world, being a tourist or visiting a museum or listening to a concert, aligns very much with the goals that I have as a pianist. And that includes being more in tune with my emotions and being more responsive to them, acknowledging and analyzing it critically, but also responding to it rather than trying to set it aside in favor of the intellect, which is what I used to always do. I was just looking at some of my recent recordings of Clara Schumann's Sonata, which I played so many times since 2018. I was listening to old recordings, I was listening to 2019 recordings, and then 2021, and then this year. And in the past, I used to think, oh, I need to play every piece to an ideal. Like all of them is all headed towards this definite point, which is like the perfect interpretation that I can do for this piece. Through my artistic research, I've really just started to rethink that ideal and question if I need that in the first place, or if just every performance of the same piece can just be completely different, down to tempo choices, and that all of the outcomes which might be recorded could be equally valid and equally good performances. Or maybe I don't even need to think about whether it's equally good. They're just different performances, and that's just it. So yeah, it's a lot of trusting my intuition as a pianist and my instrument, and not trying to rationalize every single detail to such an extent that I then don't feel so liberated when I play. With Clara Schumann's Sonata, and also with some other works which I'm surrounding her sonata with, slight digression, but I've been looking at Daniel Leach Wilkinson's Challenging Performance book, which is actually the one that I'm going to recommend for question 3. But yeah, through reading his scholarship and also through my autoethnography, I have really been thinking about how musical structure, the way we understand musical structure and the way that composers understood musical structure before the late 19th century is so different. And there is a lot to learn from how performers place themselves as sort of equal beings to composers, whereas nowadays there tends to still be this hierarchy of composers over performers. And one of the ways that this manifests is actually an obsession with the score and what we think the score tells us, and not listening to our own bodies, how our hands respond to the music as we play it, and what that could mean for the possible musical meaning, for the interpretation of the work, for our sense of form and structure in the work. Being a performer in my own body, a lot of the work happens away from the practice room. Actually, there's a lot of thinking and feeling that doesn't happen at the piano. It also doesn't always feel like work, which is nice.
So, Ning Hui, what is a publication or book that you could recommend to the artistic research communities?
Mm-hmm. So this book, it's by Daniel Leach Wilkinson. It's been such a transformative piece of writing for me. I wish it existed when I was an undergrad student because it's life-changing. And the best part about this book is that it's free, and he's actually turned it into a website. I like the empowering tone behind the entire book, which brings out the creative agency that a performer can have, almost giving young musicians that permission to break out of the walls which they've built around themselves. Like, oh, you need to play a sonata like this, you need to play structure. There is one chapter called You Must Play Structure. I think that's not the most important issue at the moment. It's questioning our values and how that shapes the music that we play and how we play it.
I would like to add a little personal reflection about Ning Hui. Ning Hui is very versatile in just taking that Clara Schumann sonata and doing all of these amazing experiments with it by programming it in various different ways and comparing those ways. And she's not only doing that in theory, all of her programs that she's writing about in her PhD research, they've all been performed in front of audiences all over the world. By creating a network of ideas, whereby her programs touch aspects of genre, a critical approach to the literature, and autoethnographic studies of her own work in her day-to-day life with Clara Schumann. Ning Hui is stepping forward as a really astonishing, innovative, admirable artistic research expert. The aspect of autoethnography is involved in a sensitive manner in Ning Hui's research. What I find particularly impressive is her virtuosity and sensibility in using autoethnography. You are the object of your research, so you have to create some distance to yourself. No, you have to also account for the ethno part of your autoethnography project, and that means your cultural context. You have to create links from yourself to your own culture, and Ning Hui does that astonishingly well in her PhD research because she interviews all kinds of other pianists and professors who also have daily programming choices that they're making. And so she shares with them a certain interest. Given that Ning Hui is studying herself as well as others, she's building two concurring studies, which allows her to test and validate the emergent themes. With her approach to autoethnography around Clara Schumann, and with her being such a sensational pianist on top of everything, she looks at herself as in her own world. She does not look at herself in a vacuum. And that is really wonderful about her research. Above all, how do we do research and performance? By being performers and documenting ourselves in self-reflective ways.